can't see what's stopping Djokovic from winning 2 Grand Slams a year at least for the next 4 or 5 years, which would see him go up to 27, 28, which would be an incredible feat. But I honestly think he's that good.
It's a miracle! Oh yeah! What about that one? Unbelievable! Balotelli, Aguero! Crowd cheers. Here's Siddle. Oh, the ball is close. He's given him. He's given him. Peter Siddle's got a hat-trick on his birthday.
Hello and welcome back to the On The Ball podcast. This is episode 106 of the show, and today we are back here to round up the Australian Open. The summer of Australian tennis was pretty different this year, it has to be said. Obviously with COVID, most of the tournaments were played in Melbourne. There is one being played in Adelaide right now, but none in Brisbane, none in Sydney, none in Perth. All the pre-tournament action was in Melbourne, and then obviously the Australian Open, as it always is, was at Melbourne Park. It was a pretty successful tournament. No real COVID scares. Obviously, everyone had a pretty thorough quarantine, so it wasn't that likely that it was going to happen. Sadly, there was a 5-day lockdown in Melbourne mid-tournament, so there wasn't crowds every day, which definitely hurt the watchability. I don't know if that's a word of the tournament. I think I can point out Djokovic-Zverev. I had some mates who said that was a pretty highest quality match of tennis, but I wasn't that engaged in it, wasn't that into it, and I think the crowd not being there was a big thing. Both players didn't have as much like energy and passion. Not that they didn't care about the match, but as in there weren't as many like come-ons or shows of emotion, and I think that was a big thing. But obviously, we did what we could to get through the Australian Open. I think it was ran pretty well by everyone at Tennis Australia. Pretty high standard of tennis as well. You would have thought maybe some of the players would have been a bit rusty, but I didn't think there was too much rust associated with any of the matches. So today I'm just going to be discussing the winners and losers of the tournament, so who came out of it well, who struggled in it. I'm doing my votes once again this year, so it's not necessarily if you win you get all the votes, but it's sort of something like that. So I'm going to run through my votes for the tournament, then I'm also going to discuss my favourite matches of the competition, and then I'm going to be looking at some of the other tournaments that have taken place so far this season, and then I'm going to preview some of the tournaments coming up, and also that this week there's a few matches on right now as I record. Sam Stosur is playing, and a few other people. I'm going to try and not say as much this podcast because I say it a lot, but I'll try my best. I just said it again. Starting with my best matches of the tournament, I'll start on the women's side. Honourable mention goes to Alya Tomljanovic versus Simona Halep in the second round. It was either the end of the day session or the start of the night session, and Tomljanovic had match points against Halep, which would have been a huge upset. The number 2 seed crashing out in the second round would have been crazy. Halep did manage to come back. I think Tomljanovic was 5-2 up in the third, if I'm not mistaken, and she did choke a little bit, but fair play to Halep. That was a pretty impressive match. I didn't catch too much of it because I was actually at the tennis for the first 4 days, and this was during that period, so I didn't see this too much, but from what I heard, it was a very impressive match. Tomljanovic played out of her skin, almost came out with a huge scalp. I'm trying not to say but yeah, that was a good match. Then number 3, I'm going to give it to a bit of a strange one. I know one of my mates was there and he was saying it wasn't the highest quality match, but I think it was the third round of the Friday of the first week. Su Wei Shea of Chinese Taipei versus Sara Errani. Shea obviously went on to make the quarterfinals, if I'm not mistaken, and played Osaka. Errani, obviously lost if Shea got to the quarterfinals, but this was a 6-4, 2-6, 7-5 epic at the John Cain Arena. Probably, it's the kind of match, if it was on an outside court, I would go watch, but if it's on an arena, I'm probably not going to be picking it to watch on TV, but it was a big battle between these two experienced campaigners. Irani's kind of gone to the wayside in the last few seasons, but she had a pretty impressive tournament. after coming through as a qualifier, and then Suve Shea. She's always been pretty good in Australia, and she's always been one to upset a big opponent, and she proved herself this tournament with some big scalps, beating like Vondrasova, Irani, and she did go down to the eventual champion as well. So that's my number 3. Pretty good match. Came down to the final set, 7-5. Number 2, I'm going to give it to Aryna Sabalenka and Serena Williams. The 4th round in the women's was probably where the highest quality matches took place, in my opinion. There were some good quarterfinals, but I think the 4th round there were some blockbusters, and this was definitely one of the big ones. It was on the same day as Mergaroosa versus Osaka. It is probably one of the best Rod Laver Arena schedules I've ever seen, especially in a 4th round. Can't remember who else was on during that day. I think it was Team Dimitrov, which didn't end up being as good as it looked on paper, and not sure who else was on that day, but there were some great matches. But yeah, Sabalenka really pushed Serena Williams. It was an interesting clash of styles, very similar players, big serves, strong forehands, just power players really. They're used to belittling their opponents by just overpowering them, but they're not going to be able to do it to each other as they are so strong themselves. And this match really had ebbs and flows. At certain times it looked like Sabalenka was going to overrun Serena, and then other times it looked like Serena was just going to be too good on the day, which is what ended up happening. Just overpowered her in the 3rd set to bring it home 6-4, but Sabalenka had a barnstorming 2nd set where she won 6-2, so it was a very back and forth match, but some impressive power hitting on display, and yeah, just a really high quality match between two people with interesting styles. So that was one of my favourite matches, but then my favourite match in the women's draw was Mergaroosa versus Osaka on the same day as I mentioned earlier. Osaka faced, as everyone's been talking about, faced 2 match points, managed to get through it, and obviously went on to win the championship. But Mergaroosa, she's just so dangerous at the moment with her low ranking relative to how good she is. She needs to really improve that for her own good, but as a viewer, it's providing some pretty interesting matchups early on in tournaments. She's obviously good enough to be making semi-finals and finals at pretty much every slam, but the fact that she is so low-ranked means she does have to come up against higher-ranked opponents pretty early, and it was unfortunate that both Mergaroosa and Osaka had to play each other in the 4th round, as one of them had to be eliminated so early, as I do believe they could have both met in the final if the draw was made another way. But yeah, really impressive matchup. Both played really well. Osaka just clutched up when it mattered and just stormed home, as she kind of made a bit of a feature of her game. She tends to win the last 2 games of the match in ridiculous speed, and she just knows when to put the foot on the accelerator, and she really clutched up here. And she quoted that because she was down match points, now she feels like she had nothing to lose for the rest of the tournament, and that could have gone a long way to her winning. On the men's side, my honourable mention is going to go to Tsitsipas and Kokkinakis. Similar to Tomljanovic and Halep, I didn't see much of it because I was there, but this looked like an incredible match. When I saw the schedule, I was like, Kokkinakis can't beat him, but he might be able to, push it to a tiebreaker or something, get the crowd involved. But the fact that he took him to 5 sets, pretty incredible from Kokkinakis. He's had a lot of injury issues, very high quality tennis player. I think at his best he could be a top 50 player. But Tsitsipas almost got knocked out very early. I think this was only 2nd round, and as the number 5 seed, I think he was number 5, or was he number 6? Oh, I can't. Yeah, no, he was number 5. I think Zverev was number 6. You can't be going out in the 2nd round, and he didn't. He clutched up at the end, and went on to have a very impressive tournament. So this was a bit of a sliding doors moment for Tsitsipas. If he goes out in the 2nd round to Kokkinakis, he's coming out as one of the biggest losers of the competition, but now he's coming out as one of the biggest winners. So that's my honourable mention there. In 3rd, I'm going to have Shapovar Love versus Sinner. In the 1st round, similar to Mergaroosa, this is just a ridiculous standard of match for such an early round in the tournament. I think this will be one of Sinner's last matches, one of his last tournaments ever not being seeded. That's probably excluding like 500s. You get some pretty good 500s where if you're not in the top 15, you're not seeded. But I think he's now ranked 32 or something, so that means he's going to be seeded for Grand Slams, and unless he's playing at some stacked 250 or something like that, he's going to be seeded there, and then he'll probably be seeded in Masters moving forward. So we won't have to worry too much about him coming up against quality players like this in the first round any longer, but poor Shapovalov, you couldn't get a worse first round draw, I don't think, than Jannik Sinner right now. He pushed him the whole way, 5 sets. It was a really entertaining match, especially for the first round. There's usually quite a few 5-set thrillers in the first round, but they're not usually of the highest standard. It's usually in the third, fourth quarterfinals where the standard really begins to lift. But from the outset, these two are playing such high quality tennis, and it's just a shame that Jannik Sinner had to crash out on night one. But really entertaining match between two young guns and two stars of the future. Number 2, I've got Kiros versus Umber. This was a high quality match, but this is probably more because of the atmosphere, the event it was. Second round matchup, Kiros, another guy, like we keep mentioning, Mergaroosa Sinner, he's a lot better than his ranking suggests. He was unseeded at this Australian Open. Seriously dangerous player to come up against if you are seeded like it was for Umber. It went to 5 sets, 6-4 in the 5th to Kiros. He saved match points in the 4th, I believe. Because he won the second set, so he couldn't have saved them in the third. Umber played pretty well, to be honest, and I think he might have announced himself a little bit to the Australian public, but Kiros was just too good on the night, and the crowd was absolutely pumping. I love that Kiros doesn't play at Rod Laver Arena. I personally am not a fan of Rod Laver Arena, especially in the first week, so I'm glad that Kiros gives, especially John Cain Arena. Margaret Court's still pretty good because there's some big names that play there and you get some good matches like Shapovalov, Sinner, but John Cain Arena or Hisense Arena or whatever you want to call it, the third arena, often doesn't have too much going for it. Normally it's packaged with the ground passes, so if you go to the outside courts you can watch Hisense Arena or John Cain Arena, but this year due to COVID they zoned it off, so it was his own sort of section, so they're really lucky that Kiros opts to play at John Cain Arena because it kind of gave that zone its own, I don't know how to explain it, but he was just basically the headline act for that zone every day or every second day. So he got that place pumping, and then that kind of gets the atmosphere of that court going for other matches as well. So it's very cool that Kiros does that, and it's just a really interesting thing to watch. I do think when I watch those matches of Kiros, I do think that tennis can suffer sometimes from being a bit too polite, and I think a little bit more of that could be a good thing for tennis, and I think it could involve a lot more of the younger audience. You see it in soccer and even in certain matches in cricket like the Barmy Army. Everyone loves a bit of a rowdy crowd. It always adds to the on-field action, so I think I went to the President's Cup. Normally when you watch golf on TV it's very tame, but at the President's Cup in Australia, it was very loose, a lot of drunk blokes, a lot of screaming, a lot of yelling, a lot of banter, and that really improved the watchability of it at the ground and on TV. So I think tennis, that's something they could work on a little bit, be a little bit looser in terms of the crowd. I know you can't have blokes like screaming at the top of their lungs mid-serve, but I think they should be a little bit looser and just let a little bit more rowdiness go because it makes it a lot more entertaining spectacle. And Kiros brings that to the sport, which is cool. Number 1, Tsitsipas versus Nadal. For me, this is probably the best tennis match I've seen since, probably back in the prime of the Big Four when you used to be guaranteed like a 5-setter in the semi-finals between any combination of Murray, Djokovic, Nadal, and Federer, even Stan at times. They were really good matches. They would always go deep into the 5th, but this was just such high-quality tennis. I'll be honest, I completely wrote off Tsitsipas from the get-go, and I'm glad he proved me wrong, to be honest. I thought that it was destined for a Nadal-Djokovic final yet again. I was going to be so mad at it, because I, unlike a lot of tennis fans, am not a big fan of the same blokes winning every time. So for Tsitsipas to play at such a high level, and there is a lot of long rallies, which is my preference. I'm not the biggest fan of some of the men's matches we get at the moment where there's a lot of, 5-shot or less rallies because of the big serving. But yeah, there was a lot of good rallies in this, which is what Rafa brings to a tennis match, and Tsitsipas just happened to better him in the big moments, and he won 7-5 in the 5th, which I think was probably the biggest win of his career. at this point. I don't know if that's factual or not, but I'm going to claim it. Beating Rafa, not on his favourite surface, but beating him. He did beat him on clay, so maybe that's the best win of his career. But beating Nadal at a Grand Slam in a quarterfinal, allowing him to advance to a semi-final, I think that's a pretty big win for Tsitsipas. And I think he set himself up for a really big year this year. Going to be looking to put pressure on the likes of Medvedev and team in trying to push into that number 3 spot. So yeah, that's, for me, my favourite match of the tournament. Now, I'm going to move on to my votes for the Australian Open. Alright, my votes for the Australian Open. So just to explain my votes, last year I developed, I find it really interesting, just the concept of votes. If you don't know what I'm talking about, they don't have it as such in America or England, I don't think, for anything, but in the NRL, the Rugby League, and the AFL, the Australian rules competitions, they have awards where every match they award the best player, the second best player, and the third best player. The best player gets 3 votes, second best gets 2, third best gets 1. And I have a big fascination of that kind of award. So I've started doing it for other sports, and I did it during the NFL season. I did it last year on my own in AFL and NRL, and I'm going to done it a little bit for cricket, and I'm also doing it for tennis this year. So Grand Slams, the way it works, the whole voting system is very confusing. I'm not going to explain it to you now, but basically it's mainly objective. I've got a bit of a statistical algorithm, but it's also a little bit subjective. So for the Australian Open, the max votes you can get is 96, and then it goes down 6 votes every time. 16 people pick up votes. It goes like 96, 90, 84, blah, blah, blah. So obviously right now the overall leaderboard's pretty irrelevant because there's only been a few competitions. So it's basically just the Australian Open votes is what the leaderboard is. But in terms of the votes for the men, it's pretty obvious who picked up full votes in my opinion. It's Aslan Karatsev, the Russian qualifier who went on a dream run to the semis, was competitive against Novak in the semis, obviously lost out to him, which is no shame in doing at Rod Laver Arena. I have to be honest, I'm not going to sit here and say I predicted this, but I was doing votes last year on the Challenger Tour, and every week this guy would pick up votes in every single tournament he played, and it didn't really make me think, oh, this guy's going to go on a run next year on the ATP Tour, but I was kind of just interested in who this bloke was, so I kind of knew who he was, but I didn't know too much about him. But it's kind of been pointing to him breaking onto the ATP Tour, his success on the Challenger Tour, but not anything as extreme as this. The extent of his success at the Australian Open was unbelievable. I think he's up to rank 42 as of Monday. He went on a dream run, so he qualified for the tournament, and he was matched up against Gianluca Mager in the first round. The Italian clay court specialist beat him in 3 sets comfortably, and then this was the match that really pricked my ears up. I really like Igor Grasimov. Last year he beat Casper Ruud at the Australian Open, I believe. Went on a few good runs in tournaments in 250s. He beat Benoit Paire round 1. And then he meets up against Karatsev. I don't know if there's injury issues here, but Karatsev beat him 6-love, 6-1, 6-love. So that's where me and my mate Pilch, who is on the podcast regularly, started to look out. Then he was matched up against Schwartzman in the 3rd round, who he beat 6-3, 6-3, 6-3. And then all of a sudden, you're thinking, this is serious. Like, I'm starting to, like, no offense, like, this is very rude, but I'm starting to think, is this woke doping? Is there stuff going on here? He then beats Felix in 5, which I thought was incredible. In the quarterfinal, he then turned around and beat Dimitrov, who I have to admit, if he didn't get injured mid-match, I don't think Karatsev would have beaten him, but still, a win's a win. And then he lost to Djokovic in the semis. But absolutely incredible result for Aslan Karatsev. In terms of whether he can keep this up, I don't think he can. I think he'll just turn into a consistent ATP Tour player. I think he'll settle around, rank 60 to 70 in my personal opinion. Maybe even lower, but I don't think he's going to turn into a top 20 player, but he could prove me wrong. He was pretty impressive this year. I just think it would be too weird if he just all of a sudden went from a solid, rank 110, 120 ranked player doing well on Challenger Tour to all of a sudden being a top 20 player over one off season. But that could be done, who knows. So it's pretty incredible, but that aside, whatever happens in the future, it's an incredible tournament because it set up his life, really. He's come away with $700,000, if not more, in Australian dollars. He's guaranteed acceptance into pretty much every Masters and Grand Slam event this year, as he is now ranked 42nd or 43rd. He'll probably be seeded in a few 250s. He'll get entrance into all 500s and 250s. So this year, he's going to make a lot of money, and he's probably going to win a lot of matches, and he's just going to have a great year. I hope he can earn some points around the world so he doesn't plummet from like 40 to 200 next January when he has to defend his Oz Open points. But I'm excited to see where he goes from here. I think he has to qualify next week, if I'm not mistaken, for one of the tournaments. But I'll talk about that at the end, probably. So he gets the full votes for me, and he's subsequently leading the votes so far for my tennis voting system. Next up in the Australian Open votes, Novak Djokovic got the 90 votes, obviously winning the Grand Slam. I try and make my algorithm so it doesn't just favour the highly ranked guys, because I know otherwise it would just basically be the same as the ATP ranking system. But it's pretty hard to argue. He had a pretty awesome tournament. Yes, he dropped a few sets, which is unlike him, to blokes like Tiafoe, Fritz, Raonic, Zverev. But it's fair to say I don't think he was playing 100%. They came out and said that muscle that was annoying him was officially torn, which is pretty incredible. I reckon he was playing at 80% at best, health-wise, and he was still able to produce incredible tennis against Karatsev. He played 2 sets and hit only 1 unforced error, I believe. So he was playing really, really good. I'll be honest, I don't understand tennis fans. People were coming out and saying Medvedev could beat Djokovic, but it's like Djokovic at the Oz Open. Well, Djokovic anywhere, to be honest, and like Rafa on clay. I just don't know why people keep thinking the next gen are good enough to beat them. They're just not. Like, I was just not falling into the trap this year of thinking Djokovic was not going to win the whole thing. He was obviously going to win the whole thing unless he withdrew due to injury. And he now closes the gap on Roger Federer and Rafa Nadal. He's 2 Grand Slams behind, but as it's well documented, he is got a lot longer left in his career than those guys. And in my opinion, I'd be very shocked if he didn't end as the Grand Slam title holder at the end of his career. I just think with Rafa and Roger now declining in ability, no offense to Rafa, he's still number 2, but I just can't see him winning too many more Grand Slams on surfaces outside of clay. And then Roger, I'm not sure if he has the body anymore to play 7 matches or 6 matches, whatever it is, in a Grand Slam of really high quality tennis and beating top 10 blokes get match after match. But it is Roger Federer, so I'm sure he'll shock me there. And I just can't see what's stopping Djokovic from winning 2 Grand Slams a year at least for the next 4 or 5 years, which would see him go up to 27, 28, which would be an incredible feat, but I honestly think he's that good. He extended his lead in major titles as well. That's including Masters. So I think he will end the career as the GOAT. I'd have to say, though, I think they should all be appreciated. Everyone's too quick to get into the GOAT discussion, but it's pretty incredible that in one generation we've got 3 of arguably the best tennis players of all time. So he picked up the 90 votes for me. 84 I gave it to Mckenzie Mcdonald. He had an incredible tournament. He's obviously suffered a lot of injuries since he burst onto the scene at the Australian Open, I believe it was. I can't remember who he beat, but he upset a few seeds. Maybe he beat a Dimitrov or something like that. Rings a bell. He was a bit of a crowd favourite instantly, and he's suffered injuries. I think he's gone down as low as 250 in the rankings. He's now back up to 130 after an impressive Australian Open where he made the 4th round and lost to Medvedev. His run, he beat Cecchinato in 4, Coric in 4, and then he beat Harris in straight sets and then went down to Medvedev in straight sets. But pretty impressive tournament from him, who, for someone who gained entrance via protected ranking, and that will probably set him up for the rest of the year. He's in a challenger right now where he's beaten the number 1 seed Kukushkin in the first round. I think he could go on a bit of a run in that challenger and then hopefully crack the top 100 in rankings, and then similar to Karatsev, he'll be set up for the rest of the year in terms of draw entrance. So for him, he got the third amount of votes. Fourth, I had to give it to Medvedev. I can't lie, he did disappoint me with his final performance. It's a bit frustrating that these next-gen guys keep cock-teasing us, basically, of how good they are, and then whenever they come up against the big three, I know it's a completely different task coming up against those guys, and especially in a Grand Slam final, but it is a little bit disappointing that they are still losing in straight sets to these guys, but he had a pretty impressive tournament, got up to like a 20-match winning streak or something like that. So that was pretty incredible, and the way he dispatched of Tsitsipas in the semis, that was a pretty good effort. And Rublev in the quarters as well. And then finally rounding up my top 5, I'm not going to go through the whole list of votes, but I gave my 5th most amount of votes for Dimitrov. He had a very impressive tournament. He's always been one to kind of crash out early in these big tournaments, and it's always frustrated me, really. I've always thought he was ranked too high for his ability, but he beat Cilic in straight sets, Bolt in straight sets, which I thought were both very impressive wins. And then he beat Krano Busta 6-love, 1-love, and then he went out retired. And then he beat Team in straight sets, who, it has to be said, Team did not look 100%, but still, for Dimitrov to polish Team off in straight sets, that's impressive. And then he lost to Karatsev, as I mentioned, but mainly due to an injury. So he picked up the 5th votes with me. And yes, so that leaves the overall standings. Karatsev's on 96, Medvedev's on 90 after picking up a few votes at the ATP Cup, and Djokovic is also tied on 90. So I'm going to keep you updated on those votes throughout the rest of the season as well. I'm not sure where the future of this podcast lies with me getting back into uni next week, but we'll see how it goes. So I'll be hopefully doing a tennis one every month, but I'll see. The women's votes. First up, 96 votes. I had Carolina Mccover, came in as seed 25th. Her run had a few impressive victories, actually. She beat Ostapenko in straight sets, never easy. She then beat Mona Bartel in straight sets in the second round. She then dispatched of Karolina Pliskova in straight sets in the third round, which was a very, very impressive victory. She then beat Elise Mertens in straight sets in the fourth round. That's arguably a more impressive victory than Pliskova. And then she beat Barty in 3 sets, which I had absolutely no faith in. I thought Barty was going to cruise through her. And then she bowed out to Jennifer Brady in 3 sets in the semi-finals. However, that was an incredible run. I'm actually not sure where she's come out ranked in the updated rankings, but she must be in the top 20 now. Very impressive. I think it was her first semi-finals appearance at a Grand Slam. And yeah, she's someone who's come onto the scene a bit later. She is 23, 24, 25, somewhere in that range. She's not like 19, 20 like some of these girls do come up into the top 30 at such a young age. But she looks really impressive. Looks like she could push for a top 10 spot in this year or next year. And if she keeps that kind of tennis up, it's going to be hard to see her not enter that top 10. So she's number 9. She got the most votes for me. Then in second, I had Jessica Bagula. She had an absolute dream run. She beat Victoria Azarenka, who, if I'm not mistaken, was my pick to actually win the Australian Open, which I'm not sure if I mentioned Osaka or not. I can't remember, but I definitely mentioned Azarenka as a smoky. She dispatched of her in first sets on day 1. Then she disposed of Stosur. I was there for that match. That was an impressive victory. She then smashed Kiki Mladenovic 2-1. And then she beat Svitolina in 3 sets, which is never easy. And she took Brady to 3 sets, much like Mccover did. And she picked up the 90 votes to me, the daughter of the Buffalo Bills owners. I thought that was pretty incredible when they read out that in commentary. That's not your everyday situation, but very impressive. If she looks like one of these players who's going to be a little bit hit and miss at times. She's a bit of a smasher of the ball, but if she can be hot more often than not, she's going to be a dangerous player, really, especially if she's going to be unseeded in these big tournaments. You wouldn't want to come up against her too often. Third most votes, I've given it to Naomi Osaka. She was down match points against Mergaroosa, but apart from that, there was hardly a blip on the radar. The way she cruised over Serena Williams in the semi-finals, for me, was the most impressive victory of the tournament. She's just on another level, really. She's not the number 1 ranked tennis player right now, but she clearly is the best women's tennis player. To me, she reminds me of a bit like Serena back in like 2008, 2009, 2010, where no one could really compete with her in too many levels. She does have some similarities to Serena, but I do think at times she has a bit more finesse than Serena does. And I know we don't need to compare them. They're both amazing talents in their own rights. Well, Serena's more than a talent. She's the GOAT. But Osaka's a huge talent. 4 Grand Slams at the age of 23, I believe. And she looks like she's going to be a dominant force for many years to come. Excited to see how she goes on the clay and the grass. She's never really had success on either of those surfaces. We didn't see her on either of those surfaces last year, as Wimbledon wasn't held and she didn't go to Roland Garros. But on hard court, there's no one really up to her level right now. I think her on clay will be very interesting, because I think the slow court will bring her power down, as it does for a lot of players, and that means people like Barty and Halep are probably more likely to be able to contend with her there. But for me, on hard courts, Osaka, I don't think many people can challenge her. Yes, Halep and Barty on their day are very good, but I just think Osaka will outpower them if she's playing at 70%, let alone 100% like she was for most of this tournament. I can't even think who could stop Osaka. I think Sabalenka, I think if she keeps progressing the way she is, I think she's one that could challenge Osaka on hard courts in the next few years. She has the power game to do it. And then even someone like a Swiatek, or Swiatek, however you want to pronounce it, she has the power game to do it. Just needs to work on the consistency. And then people like Mergaroosa and Azarenka can all do it. But people like Svitolina, Kenin, good luck to them, really, because I think Osaka is just going to be too strong for them 99 times out of 100. So she got the third most amount of votes for me. Fourth most was Serena Williams. Yes, that match against Osaka in the semis was a bit of a... it was a bit underwhelming, I'm not going to lie, but her destruction of Simone Halep in the quarters and then the way she fought over Sabalenka in the fourth round was seriously impressive. She didn't really have too many easy matches, Serena, and she looked a lot better than she has in recent years, in my opinion. She looked back to the level where she could win a Grand Slam this year. I can't lie, I'm mixed with Serena. I'm not the biggest fan of her just because I grew up with her winning every single Grand Slam, but at the same time, I want her to finish with the most Grand Slams, so part of me hopes she gets it done this year and just retires, but another part of me thinks I want her to end when she's still playing at a high level. I don't want her career to dwindle in search of this Grand Slam record. And then number 5 was Sue Shea, who made the quarterfinals, as we mentioned in the favourite matches segment. So that's basically the top 5 overall as well. Once again, I'm going to keep you posted on this in the months to come. So excited to see how that ends up, especially with the women's. There's so many upsets, so my voting system could be quite wacky. So we've looked at the good things about the tournament, who did well. Now I don't want to be too negative on this podcast. I like being positive. I think sport should be something that's mainly positive, but I do want to highlight some of the people who came out of this as the biggest losers. Looking at the women's side, for me the biggest loser was Sofia Kenin. Her first Grand Slam title defence attempt in her career after winning the Australian Open in 2020. I have to say it was underwhelming. I wasn't expecting her to win it, but the fact that she lost in the second round, she was pushed by Madison Inglis in the first round, and then she got slapped by Kaya Kanepi. I actually pretty sure I pinpointed this match as one to watch for an upset because she was either playing Sevastova or Kanepi, who were both dangerous players on their day. But yeah, she lost pretty convincingly, and then even worse, she entered the Phillip Island Trophy, which was the WTA 250 tournament, being held in the second week of the Slam for players that got knocked out, and she lost to Australian wildcard Olivia Gadecki, who was ranked 700. She wasn't ranked at the time, I don't believe, and now she's ranked like 720. So yeah, it was a pretty bad fortnight for Sofia Kenin, one to forget. And yeah, look, it's not helped her cause in people saying that last year was just a fluke. I think she's a good player. I don't think she's the 4th best player in the world. I think she's one of these players like Svitolina who's probably going to have a high ranking for a lot of her career, but might not necessarily be as she's probably not going to be a favourite going into many Grand Slams, in my opinion. She's just a very inconsistent player, and she's going to find it hard to... I think she's going to find it hard to win another Grand Slam, if I'm honest. She's only very young, but I just don't know if she has the consistency in her game to put up 7 good performances. So for me, she was one of the biggest losers in the women's draw. Other losers, this is probably harsh, but Bianca Andrescu, this was her first Grand Slam since she won the US Open. I was in 2019, very excited to see how she went. She was the 8th seed coming into it, and she'd only played a handful of tournaments. She was such an impressive talent when she debuted on the tour in 2019, and I think she played a bit in 2018, I can't remember. But first round, she got pushed by Mihaela Băsescu, a Romanian lucky loser. She got pushed in 3 sets. Then she got smacked by Shea in the second round, which was a pretty big disappointment. She then did also enter the Phillip Island Trophy and had a pretty good tournament, made the semis. I'm not as worried about her in terms of if she's going to be good in the long run. I still think she's an incredible talent and will win many tournaments to come, but just a bit disappointing given the amount of hype she had coming into this tournament, how excited everyone was to see how she went, and the way she bowed out. Her draw opened up pretty nicely because Kirsteya beat Kvitova in the second round, which meant she was really the only big seed remaining, and she just failed to live up to expectation, really. Anyone else worth noting? Just running through the names now. Barty was a bit of a disappointment. She lost in the quarterfinals, but it was more the way she lost. She was up. She won the first set 6-2, and she was up a break, I think, in the second, and then just got trounced upon. She doesn't look like she has what it takes to win a hard court Grand Slam at the moment. Victoria Azarenka was a little bit disappointing, it has to be said, losing in the first round of a slam. Never what you want from a high seed, a highly touted player, but that happens sometimes, so we'll let her off. Then looking at the men's, Dominic Thiem was a bit of a disappointment, it has to be said, coming off an incredible 2020 where he lifted his maiden Grand Slam trophy. But he beat Kiros in 5 sets, which I thought was a pretty impressive victory. But then the way he couldn't back it up and beat Dimitrov, that was pretty disappointing. I thought Zverev was disappointing. This is a strange call because I know everyone loves Zverev, and it's hard to beat Djokovic on his day, but I don't think Djokovic played that well against him, but he still looked a long way from beating him, and I just don't think he's at the level of Tsitsipas, Medvedev, Thiem. I honestly even rate Rublev and Shapovalov above him in terms of being able to beat those guys in 5 sets. I know Rublev hasn't really shown it in the past, and I know Zverev has beaten them a lot in 3 sets, but yeah, it's just something, I'm just not the biggest fan of him. I think he's a little bit overrated. Who else had a bit of a disappointing one? Gael Monfils, shocking tournament, really. I do think he has reached his peak in terms of ranking. I think we'll start to see him fall a little bit this year. He lost to Emil Rusevori in the first round. I was there for that. He just didn't really look like he wanted to be there in the 5th set, if I'm honest. Denis Shapovalov, that was a little bit disappointing, the way he bowed out in the 3rd round so easily to Felix. I thought his draw was really soft, and I thought he had a chance of making a semi-final run, but that wasn't to be. That happened to be the quarter that Karatsev went on to win. No one else that I really want to mention. There was quite a few upsets early in the rounds, but a lot of the lower seeds, that's pretty common. So they're just some of the guys I wanted to mention that didn't have the greatest time of it in Melbourne Park. Looking elsewhere in the tennis world, that's enough for my Oz Open review. Now I'm going to just have a look at some of the other tournaments that have been going on both last week and looking forward this week and next week. On the men's side of the ATP Tour, there were no ATP Tour events, but there was a Challenger Tour event in Italy. It was a Challenger 100, I think. 100 points, I think, was up for grabs for the winner. There are a few good players here. Kwon Soon Woo, if I'm saying that. Kwon Soon Woo, sorry if I'm not saying that right. He beat Lorenzo Musetti, the young gun Italian, in straight sets. Musetti's been in pretty good form recently, so I'm excited to see how he tracks this year. I think he'll definitely end the year in the top 70, 60 odd, and he's going to be one to watch for the future. He beat Ernest Golbus, Lucas Lachko, and Andrei Seppi on his road to the final, and Soon Woo Kwon beat the likes of Donskoy, Yannick Madden, and a lot of other good players. So that was pretty impressive from Kwon after a disappointing loss to Kokkinakis in the first round of the Australian Open. Then on the women's side, we had the Phillip Island Trophy, which saw Daria Kasatkina almost playing back to her best in the last few weeks. She had a pretty good Australian Open summer. She beat the likes of Katie Bolter, Grakeva, what's her first name? Varvara Grakeva, Anastasia Pavlyuchenkova, Petra Martic, Danielle Collins, and Mary Buzkova. So that's a very impressive win. Pretty stiff to only cop 250 points for that many victories at that level, but still, that'll do wonders for her confidence, and moving forward into the European season, she'll be extremely keen to keep on winning. Actually, I don't know why I said the European season. It's not really the European season, is it? There's like Doha and there's Indian Wells and Miami, but you know what I mean. Other key names in this, Bianca Andrescu made the semis, then went out to Buzkova. Buzkova had a pretty good tournament as well. Danielle Collins as well went on a pretty good run. So yeah, that's all I've got to mention from there. However, this week we've got some good tournaments coming up as well. Just starting on the Challenger Tour, I think Mckenzie Mcdonald's probably my pick to win this. He just beat Kukushkin 7-5, 7-5, and that's really opened up his draw. It's not really anyone who I think is good enough to challenge him in this tournament. I think he should go on and win it, but you never know on the Challenger Tour. Weird things happen. On the women's side, there's the Adelaide International. There's some huge names in this. I think this might be a 500 actually. So interested to see who comes out on top here. You've got the likes of Konta, Bencic, Corey Goff, Elise Mertens, Swiatek, and Barty. This is the kind of tournament Barty wins. She's very consistent at tournaments like this and sort of making quarterfinals at the big tournaments, but not necessarily kicking on. But I think she would back herself against the likes of Swiatek, Mertens, Konta, Bencic. There's not really any of the big power hitters that scare her away, so I think she would fancy her chances here. She does have Danielle Collins in the second round though, which is a bit of a danger match for Barty. Then on the men's ATP Tour, there is a whole host of tournaments this week. Looking at the Open Sud de France, we've got Roberto Bautista Agut leading the line, David Goffin as well, and those two are not invincible at all. So excited to see who comes out on top here. I think Yannick Sinner's a bit of a smoky here. He's the 5th seeded player, but I think out of the field, he's probably the most informed player, even though he did only lose in the first round at the Oz Open. Andy Murray, notably, is making a wildcard appearance. He's playing Gerasimov in the first round. Then on the South American swing, we have Diego Schwartzman leading the line at the Cordoba Open. Pretty hard to make a prediction for this one because there's usually just some rando clay court specialist who wins it, someone like a Londero or a Saboth Field, so we'll see how that goes. Then the Singapore Open, the number 1 seed is Adrian Manarino, so definitely the weakest out of the 3 tournaments, but excited to see who comes out on top on this one. There's not that many big names. Someone like a Marin Cilic, I reckon, could win this one. Yeah, it's really up for grabs for anyone here. John Millman could be dangerous as well. So interested to see who gets up there. And there's a few good tournaments coming up in the following weeks as well. I think we've got Doha coming up soon. The likes of Team, Federer, Rublev, Shapovalov will all be there. So excited for that one. And there's also Dubai the following week and Marseille that week during Dubai as well, where Medvedev, Tsitsipas, Berrettini will all be. So some huge tournaments coming up. And then in April, we've obviously got Indian Wells and Miami. Both should be on. Actually, no, Indian Wells is postponed. Oh, I'm so confused. But Miami's happening, I'm pretty sure. So actually, don't even take that for granted. Who knows what's going on anymore. But a lot to look forward to in the tennis world. Hopefully more tennis content to come your way. I've really enjoyed covering the Australian Open. Oh, also, thanks for everyone who got around the Instagram polls. Roger Federer was voted the most popular men's tennis player, and Ash Barty was voted the most popular women's tennis player. But yeah, that was a bit of fun. We'll look to try and do more of stuff like that in the future, just to get a bit more involvement, engagement going around the page. So yeah, really appreciate that. And stay tuned for more content. AFL and NRL is almost here, so we'll be having probably weekly episodes of both those sports. But yeah, really enjoying my sport at the moment. A lot of cycling, a lot of soccer, so stay tuned, a lot of cricket. And there'll be more content coming as always. And thanks for listening if you've got this far, and enjoy the rest of your week. Cheers.